Hi guys, Tanner Scott here, taking you through an audio abstract of our recently accepted paper in Science and Medicine and Football entitled Running Momentum, a new method to quantify prolonged high intensity intermittent running performance in collision sports. Firstly, I'd like to thank my co-authors Ben Dascombe, Jace Delaney, Colin Sanctuary, McFarlane Scott, Jeremy Hickmans and Grant Duffy with their help and assistance in preparing this manuscript for publication. What we aim to do in this investigation was to identify a new way to examine changes in prolonged high-intensity intermittent running ability in collision sport athletes, in this case rugby league, to sit alongside more traditional methods, which are typically velocity-based measures. Within collision sports, higher body mass is seen to be beneficial due to the increased momentum that the athletes may achieve prior to contact, which is seen to be in performance of benefit to performance within match play. However, having an increased body mass results in a greater inertia affecting the athlete during running, particularly with shuttles. So the aim of this study was to identify a separate indicator of prolonged high-intensity intermittent running performance to sit alongside a velocity-based measure, including the interplay of body mass into this figure. Importantly, very briefly, prolonged high-intensity intermittent running ability has been shown to not be able to differentiate levels of competition within rugby league, with no substantial differences previously witnessed using a 12-second maximum repeated sprint shuttle test. However, this test utilised a 1:3 work-rest ratio, therefore eliciting a high reliance on anaerobic metabolism, which may not be exactly reflective of the aerobic anaerobic profile that is probably more representative of rugby league and other collision sports. In order to look at the interplay between body mass and prolonged high-intensity intermittent running, we aimed to integrate a new method, which was PIFT, term PIFT, which was the product of the individual's body mass and final running velocity, which we converted to meters per second for ease of use. Now, this was determined from the 3015, this final velocity. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's a 40-metre shuttle. I'm sure most of you are well aware of it. Starting at 8 kilometres an hour, 30 seconds of running, 15 seconds recovery. As soon as the athlete doesn't hit 3 zones consecutively, their final velocity is then the final stage that they completed. So, utilising this final velocity and their individual body mass, we came up with both PIFT and VIFT and aimed to compare both positional groups within rugby league and competition levels across these two measures. In order to do this, we recruited 136 rugby league athletes across NRL, elite, sub-elite, state league, under-20s, under-18s, under-16s, and some local league athletes. They all performed the 3015 IFT, and a measure of body mass, or PIFT I should say, was calculated from this. From a statistical point of view, simply we used a magnitude-based approach, incorporating effect sizes to identify differences between these competition levels and positional groups. So what you can see right here is quite a nice graph just to outline the differences in both PIFT and VIFT. And while PIFT may discriminate levels of competition quite well, VIFT is a bit more subtle across the positional groups. There's still differences there, they're just not quite as high, beg your pardon. So what we found was between NRL and other levels of competition, within PIFT we saw moderate to very large differences, and within VIFT we saw moderate to large. So there's still differences there, but as you can see from figure 2 here, is that the differences in PIFT, particularly when comparing elite to junior athletes and new academy athletes, is quite superior to differences in VIFT, with very large differences seen here. Similarly, when we compared state-based and sub-elite rugby league players with junior athletes, we saw similar findings, not quite as dramatic as when comparing elite to these cohorts, but still greater differences generally in PIFT than VIFT across these athletes. So, as I mentioned, we saw likely to very likely increases in PIFT attained from the 30-15 between NRL and other levels of competition. On top of this, we also saw differences in positional groups between PIFT and VIFT, which are highly reflective of the match play demands of these athletes. We saw our forwards, who typically are required to have a greater body mass and lean muscle mass, have a greater PIFT than the smaller backs and other spine or adjustable athletes, which typically are smaller guys, whether these guys typically had a greater VIFT and greater fitness level, you would say, across a mixed aerobic and anaerobic performance. On top of this, we saw that VIFT was able to discriminate between competition groups, as I mentioned, where it previously hadn't, which was a nice finding. And as such, we see that PIFT, and not just VIFT, may present a more appropriate holistic method of quantifying prolonged high intensity intermittent running ability in collision sport athletes. Importantly, this study was based off the work from Darrell Jones et al. In rugby union, who suggested that an individual's body mass, an increase in individual's body mass, is very likely to almost certainly increase VIFT, and we can confirm these findings, showing these greater differences in PIFT. Now, from a conclusion and a practical applications point of view, this is extremely important when you're looking at developing your athletes from your academy systems through to your elite levels. I think monitoring the interplay between mass and your high intensity running ability is important here, as you aim to put body mass on these younger athletes as they progress through your development pathways. And importantly, we see here that PIFT may be a separate indicator of physical performance within these collision-based sports, where putting on this body mass and size is seen as being beneficial as they grow and develop through the grades. And particularly where you've got a heterogeneous squad where cross-positional groups, they might be highly different to body shapes, anthropometrical differences, as well as physiological differences. So taken together, we find that VIFT and PIFT may be both highly useful when monitoring athletes across time within collision sports, and potentially have a greater scope for other athletes as well. Again, I'd like to thank all my co-authors, and thank you, Rob,